Okay, here's the fourth and final video dealing with the contemporary theology of Scripture that you find in O'Collins. You've noticed that, right? I've had to take issue with O'Collins on a few pieces in those previous videos. Here, though, this last section, it's on the bottom of chapter 10 notes. It's the last section of the note sheet on O'Collins. Interpreting the Bible, reading with three intentions. So what's most important about this section is that O'Collins is actually incorporating into the pattern of Dei Verbum and into authentic Christian hermeneutical interpretive theory. He's dialoguing and incorporating the best and the most usable parts of contemporary philosophical hermeneutics. So this idea of three intentions, and you see the three, right? Authorial intent, the intention of the text, the intention of the reader. Those are all categories from contemporary philosophical hermeneutics, particularly Gadamer and another gentleman named Paul Ricoeur, who maybe you don't know. He was a Chicago philosopher. So that's the value of this section, that he's actually able to correlate authentic Catholic interpretive theory with the best of contemporary philosophical hermeneutical theory. There's a whole bunch of contemporary philosophical hermeneutical theory that he does not incorporate, like the Marxist schools and the liberative schools and the feminist schools and so forth, all of which, in my humble opinion, have some value but require a lot more work and sifting. So just to kind of go through it, authorial intent we talked about today. It's still Friday of our last class. And we talked about that today, right? Authorial intent, and using all the historical criticism. This is Dei Verbum 12, the beginning of Article 12, getting at the author's intent because God spoke through them, right? And so you really need to attend to that, right? The second one is the intentio textus, the intention of the text, which is the way the contemporary philosophical hermeneutics talks about there are texts, and then there are the interpretive traditions of those texts, right? And for us, that interpretive tradition of the text is the church as it moves in its journey through time, guided by the Spirit and reigned over by the Lord. So, and we know clearly, right, that it's in that subsequent history where the text, in its intention to create knowledge of Christ and so forth, actually expands, or you could say sort of develops its meaning. I gave you the example today, didn't I, of Bonaventure chapter 4 of the Itinerarium, the soul's journey into God. It says that the Canticle of Canticles was written for the fourth stage of contemplation, right? This erotic poem that historical critics say, yeah, it's wonderful that there's an erotic poem in the Bible, but actually the reception of that as the great work of climbing the ladder to mystical union with God is not realized until the subsequent reception. It's known in our reception history, or what we just simply call the theological ecclesial tradition. Okay, he makes the point that that the text achieves its intention within the community of saints. It should be kind of clear and inspiring. We read the text with the saints. And this is very much related to Gadamer's Wirkungsgeschichte. Wirkungsgeschichte means the history of its effects. So there's the text, and then there's the impact of the text on those who, to use the philosophical language, receive it as a classic, receive it as a normative text, right? And so we're attentive to the whole history of the text, which is why we're not just biblicists in the sense of only concerned with what Paul meant. we're also concerned with all that Paul came to mean and all the ways in which Paul was received and celebrated in the community of faith, right? I think that's pretty clear. I find that really important. It's a wonderful overlap between contemporary hermeneutics and theological hermeneutics. The third is the intention of the reader. So I don't know how that sounds to you, but that should, if you know enough of the contemporary hermeneutical scene, that sounds like reader response or reader criticism, which really kind of emphasizes the impact that the reader has on the meaning of the text in the philosophical discussion about it. But the importance of the reader reading is the opportunity that is what occasions O'Collins to take the opportunity to talk about, again, De Verbum 12c, right? In 3a there, we read it in the same spirit. We read the text in the same spirit in which it was written. We emphasize that a lot today in class, right? We read it within the community. We read it with our faith. Those, you should understand those as sort of pointing to those three rules: the whole of Scripture, the whole of the tradition, the whole of the analogy of faith, the whole of the content of the faith. And the importance, so fundamental, of reading with a loving affinity, he calls it, but reading the text with that vulnerable receptivity and the willingness, the reader's intention to see the text as an icon, to engage the text knowing that you're actually being addressed by God, right? So that's the loving affinity. We read it with a spirit of consent, responsiveness, discovery. This always makes me think of the famous Victorine. I think it was either Victor or Hugh of St. Victor, who said, love is the faculty of seeing. It's only if you're in love with the Lord that actually the Scriptures make the sense that they're intended to make, right? This is very Augustinian. The only norm for all of Scripture, for Augustine, is charity. Even if your interpretation is wrong, historically speaking, it's not. That's not too bad as long as it's promoting the life of charity, which is the point of all the Scriptures, to cultivate the love of God and neighbor. So the loving affinity is really a crucial point. I'm at 7.5 minutes, so let me make the last point here. With a readiness to be read by the text and transformed by it. So that's Paul Ricoeur. I forget if he mentions it in the text or not, but that's Paul Ricoeur, the great philosophical hermeneut of the Chicago School. He talks about the importance of the reader reading, but the most important thing about the reader reading is that the reader allow themselves to be grasped by the text, that they're not projecting their own predilections, preferences, pre-understandings upon the text. So he talks about we're grasped by the text. The text has to grasp us, or we won't grasp the text, right? That we're found by the text rather than discovering a meaning or inventing a meaning. The text discovers us and finds us and gives us our meaning, right? These should sound like really crucial points of a spiritual reading of the text. So the text is, in essence, the text norms the reader doesn't norm the text, right? Finally, he ends with saying on page 258, pure reader response, which would deny that the text has a controlling function, and in the real radical edges of reader response, the reader controls the meaning of the text and basically imports it. We would call that eisegesis. Pure reader response, denying the controlling function of the text, the normativity of the text, we tend to say, is simply beyond the pale, right? We're normed by Christ. We're normed by Christ's word. I don't know what else to say. Let's end it there, okay? God's peace, and we'll see you Friday.